Elvis Presley, the king of rock and roll, a name that echoes through generations, a voice that changed music forever. But behind the glittering stage lights, behind the gold records and screaming fans, there was a man who controlled everything, a man who made every financial decision, a man who held the keys to Elvis's kingdom. His name was Colonel Tom Parker, and in his final years, he made one last mistake. A mistake so devastating that it revealed the truth we've been searching for all along. This is the story of power, control, and the price of trust. The year was 1955. Elvis was young, hungry, and raw. He had talent that couldn't be ignored. But talent alone doesn't build empires. Someone saw that potential. Someone who knew how to turn a boy from Tupelo into a global phenomenon. Colonel Tom Parker wasn't just a manager, he was an architect of fame. He crafted Elvis's image, controlled his schedule, and negotiated deals that seemed impossible. Parker promised Elvis the world, and, for a while, it seemed like he delivered. But every empire built on promises has cracks beneath the surface. Parker took 50% of Elvis's earnings, sometimes more. That wasn't standard. That wasn't normal. Most managers take 15, maybe 20%. But Parker convinced Elvis it was necessary. He convinced him that without his guidance, the empire would crumble. And Elvis believed him, because Parker had proven himself. He turned a truck driver into the most famous entertainer on the planet. So Elvis signed the contracts. He trusted the man who called himself Colonel. If you're already questioning how deep this story goes, you're exactly where you need to be. Hit that subscribe button right now. Turn on notifications, because what comes next will change how you see one of the most iconic partnerships in music history. This channel uncovers the truths hidden beneath the legends. And you don't want to miss what we reveal. Parker's control wasn't just financial, it was psychological. He isolated Elvis from other advisors. He made himself irreplaceable. Every decision went through him. Every contract, every tour, every movie deal. Elvis became dependent. And dependency is the most powerful form of control. Parker knew that. He weaponized it. He created a system where Elvis couldn't imagine success without him. And that system worked for decades. But systems built on control always have weaknesses. Elvis started asking questions, not loudly, not publicly, but privately. Doubts began to surface. Why was he doing so many movies he didn't want to do? Why were the contracts so complicated? Why did Parker always have an answer that shut down the conversation? Elvis was brilliant on stage, but he wasn't a businessman. He didn't understand the labyrinth of deals Parker had constructed, and Parker made sure it stayed that way. The 1960s rolled into the 1970s. Elvis's career had peaks and valleys. The movies weren't critically acclaimed, but they made money. The Las Vegas residency brought in millions. But Elvis was exhausted, physically, emotionally, and financially things weren't as clear as they should have been. Where was all the money going? Elvis lived like a king, but his expenses were controlled by Parker. The Graceland staff, the entourage, the jets, it all went through Parker's accounting, and Elvis never saw the full picture. By the mid-1970s, Elvis's health was declining. The pressure was unbearable. The schedule was relentless. But Parker kept pushing. More shows, more appearances, more revenue, because Parker needed the money too. That's what nobody understood at the time. Parker was gambling, heavily. He had debts that required a constant flow of cash, and Elvis was the cash machine. Every show Elvis performed helped Parker pay off his own mistakes, but Elvis didn't know. He just knew he was tired. Then came 1977, the year everything changed. Elvis died on August 16th. The world mourned, millions of fans grieved. But behind closed doors, something else was happening. Parker immediately began negotiating deals. Elvis's estate, merchandising rights, future royalties. He acted as if he still controlled everything. And for a moment, he did. Because the contracts he'd made Elvis sign decades earlier gave him power even after death. Here's where the story takes a turn most people never hear about. Parker tried to sell Elvis's entire catalog. He approached RCA Records with a deal that would have stripped the Presley estate of future earnings. He wanted a lump sum payment, millions up front, but that would have meant giving up royalties forever. It would have meant that every time an Elvis song played, every time a movie aired, every time merchandise sold, the estate would get nothing. Parker was willing to sacrifice Elvis's legacy for immediate cash, and he almost succeeded. You need to understand what's happening here. This isn't just business. This is betrayal. And if you care about justice, about the truth, about making sure stories like this never get buried, hit that like button. Share this video. Because the fight to expose what Parker didn't end with his pitch to RCA. It got worse. Elvis's father, Vernon Presley, was executor of the estate. He was grieving. He was overwhelmed. He didn't have Parker's experience or ruthlessness, but he had something Parker didn't expect: doubt. Vernon started asking questions. He hired lawyers. He requested audits. And what they found was staggering. Parker had been taking far more than 50%. In some deals, he took 75%. In others, 90%. He'd structured agreements where he profited more than Elvis did, and it was all legal, because Elvis had signed the contracts. But legality doesn't mean morality. Vernon could see that, the lawyers could see that, and they began to fight back. They challenged Parker's authority. They demanded transparency. They went to court, and Parker, for the first time in decades, was on the defensive. He claimed everything was legitimate. He claimed he'd made Elvis a star. He claimed he deserved every dollar. But the numbers told a different story. The estate's legal team discovered something critical. Parker wasn't actually a colonel. He wasn't even American. He was born Andreas Cornelis van Kuijk in the Netherlands. He'd entered the United States illegally. He had no passport, no documentation. He'd been living under a false identity for decades, and that fear of deportation had shaped every decision he made. He never let Elvis tour internationally because he couldn't leave the country. He'd sabotaged potential opportunities because of his own hidden past. Elvis's career had been limited by Parker's secrets. This revelation changed everything. It exposed Parker not just as a controlling manager, but as a fraud. Someone who had built an empire on lies. Someone who had prioritized his own survival over Elvis's potential. The estate pushed harder. They wanted to break the contracts. They wanted to reclaim control, and Parker's grip began to slip. In 1980, the estate filed a lawsuit. They claimed Parker had breached his fiduciary duty. They claimed he'd defrauded Elvis. They claimed he'd acted in his own interest, not Elvis's. The case was complex. The contracts were binding, but the evidence was damning. Parker had treated Elvis like a product, not a person. He'd extracted maximum value with minimum regard for long-term consequences. And now, the consequences were catching up. Parker's defense was simple. He'd made Elvis rich. He'd made Elvis famous. Without him, Elvis would have been nothing, but the estate had a counter-argument. Without Elvis, Parker would have been nothing. The talent was Elvis. The voice was Elvis. The charisma was Elvis. Parker had been the facilitator, but he'd claimed ownership. He'd acted as if he deserved more credit than the man who actually did the work. The case dragged on. Legal battles are slow, but public opinion shifted quickly. People started seeing Parker differently, not as the genius manager, but as the parasite, not as the protector, but as the exploiter. Stories emerged. Former associates spoke out. People who'd worked with Elvis shared their experiences, and the pattern was clear. Parker had controlled, manipulated, and profited, always. Think about what this means for everyone who trusts someone with their career, their money, their future. If you've ever felt like someone was taking advantage of you, you're not alone. And that's why channels like The Hidden Legacy exist, to expose these truths, to make sure power doesn't go unchecked. Subscribe now if you believe accountability matters, because this story isn't over. In 1983, the case was settled. Parker agreed to relinquish most of his claims. The estate regained control of Elvis's catalogue, his image, his legacy. Parker received a settlement, but it was a fraction of what he'd once controlled. He'd lost. Not just legally, but historically. His reputation was shattered. The man who'd built Elvis into an icon was now remembered as the man who exploited him. But here's the final twist. The mistake. The last mistake that revealed everything. Parker had believed his contracts were untouchable. He'd believed his legal structures were airtight, but he'd underestimated one thing: transparency. Once the audits began, once the numbers were exposed, the house of cards collapsed. He'd been so confident in his control that he'd left a trail. Receipts, percentages, deals, and that trail led directly to his downfall. Parker spent his final years in relative obscurity. He died in 1997, 20 years after Elvis. He never publicly admitted wrongdoing. He never apologized. He maintained until the end that he'd done what was best for Elvis. But history tells a different story. The story of a man who saw an opportunity and seized it, who built wealth on someone else's talent, who confused partnership with ownership. Elvis's estate, under the management of Priscilla Presley and later Lisa Marie Presley, rebuilt what Parker had almost destroyed. Graceland became a landmark. Elvis's music continued to generate revenue. His legacy was preserved, not because of Parker, but in spite of him. The estate proved that Elvis's value was inherent. It didn't need Parker's manipulation. It needed protection from it. Today, Elvis is still the king. His influence endures. His music still moves people. His image still captivates. And the story of Colonel Tom Parker serves as a cautionary tale, a reminder that trust must be earned and verified, that contracts should be understood, that power must be questioned, because even kings can be controlled by those they trust. This is why we do what we do at The Hidden Legacy. We dig into the stories that shaped culture. We expose the truths that were buried. We give voice to the lessons that history teaches. If this resonated with you, make sure you're subscribed, turn on all notifications, like this video, and check out the videos on your screen right now, because there are more untold stories waiting for you. Stories of power, betrayal, and the fight for truth. Parker's last mistake wasn't a single moment. It was a lifetime of believing he was untouchable, of thinking control was permanent, of assuming loyalty meant ownership. But Elvis's legacy outlived Parker's grip, and that's the real victory. Not in dollars or contracts, but in the preservation of truth. The truth that talent belongs to the artist, that fame should serve the creator, not the controller, that legends are built by those who live them, not those who manage them. Elvis gave the world his voice. Parker tried to own it. But in the end, the world reclaimed what was always theirs: the music, the memory, the king.